Do you go by R.A. Carter? That's what my daughter's rich father-in-law asked me at her country club baby shower, right after she told me, loud enough for the room, not to pile my plate. I'm Nora, 67, retired bus driver. I hem choir robes, keep Kleenex in my purse, and let people think I'm nobody. It's safer that way. The manager snapped the letter binder shut before I could finish reading 3 words. Ground lease, 2003. I finished my coffee, smiled for no one, and walked out. 2 days later, my daughter arrived with groceries, a candle that smelled like nothing, and a standard form. Durable power of attorney, effective upon execution. That means sign here and hand over your life today. Cute. Here's what she didn't know. I know where the records live. I know which parcels carry my initials. I know who staffs Meadowbrook Senior Living with 1 aide doing the work of 3 while the Connollys resurfaced tennis courts. So I took a number at the courthouse, pulled the file with my name on it, and when Graham Connolly showed up with his lawyer and his smile, I said, public meeting, 10 a.m., on the record. You want the short version? The land under their golf course has a quiet landlord, and she brought receipts. Staffing ratios, pay bumps for dishwashers, 10 free Saturdays for the community, and a public apology from her own daughter. If you've ever been laughed at by people who think you're nobody, stay right here. I'm going to show you exactly how the room gets quiet. 2 days later, Haley showed up at my condo with a bag of fancy groceries and a candle that smelled like linen, a smell that tries too hard to be nothing. My front room is tiny, a thrifted couch with a small tear I mended myself, a ceramic cardinal from the church rummage sale, picture frames with school portraits, and one of my late husband in his union jacket. The place is clean, not staged. Mom, she began, soft and syrupy, you were unpredictable at the shower. I set down a quilt and drank my coffee. If that's unpredictable, we've got low bars. She breezed past my couch like a realtor staging a showing, moving coasters she didn't need to move. Quick thing. She pulled an envelope from her tote. Connolly Family Healthcare likes everyone to have emergency paperwork in order. It's literally a standard medical form, HIPAA release and durable power of attorney, purely for emergencies. You know, if something happened. I opened the envelope. The paper was crisp, black on white, with the words durable power of attorney right on top, above a clause that read, effective upon execution. I picked up the pen she offered me, then set it on the coffee table like a cupcake I wasn't sure was baked all the way through. So you'd be my agent, make decisions for me if I couldn't. If you couldn't, she repeated, tapping her lacquered nail against the signature line. Except this doesn't say I have to be incapacitated, I replied, pointing at the clause. It says, effective upon execution, which means I hand you my keys now and hope you only use them for good. Her cheeks turned blotchy. I'm trying to help. My phone buzzed. A text from Kelsey, the manager. He asked for the lease file the minute you left, didn't know what to do, thought you should know. I locked my screen and slid the phone back into my cardigan pocket. Sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice gentle, you don't need the keys to my life. We both know this isn't about ambulances. You don't know what you don't know, she said, mouth tightening. Oh, I know enough, I said, standing up. I know there's a Franklin County recorder's office where anyone can read who owns what in this town. I know Maple Ridge was built on land that doesn't belong to the Connollys. And I know your father-in-law's long-term ground lease renews next month. Her breath hitched. How would you... I folded the standard form along the crease and slid it back into the envelope. Take this, Haley. Bring cupcakes next time if you want to stop by without an agenda. She slammed the tote shut and walked out, her perfume lingering like an apology that hadn't been said. When the door clicked behind her, I sat on my couch and listened to the building breathe. The upstairs neighbor's TV, the hum of the fridge, a bus braking at the corner. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means you can hear what matters. By Friday, my phone lit up with unknown numbers. A family attorney, a friendly notary. Haley left 3 voicemails in 1 hour, each shriller than the last. Mom, call me back. You're being stubborn. Mom, are you ignoring me on purpose? Dad says we can fix this if you just cooperate. She said cooperate like an invitation to step into a trap. Saturday morning, I rode the 10th bus to the Franklin County Courthouse. Old marble, clean floors, the smell of coffee and paper. People come here to get married, divorced, baptized by bureaucracy, or blessed by records that outlive them. I do a lot of things alone and without fanfare, including filing renewals. I took a number, waited, and when the clerk called my name, I slid my driver's license under the glass. "Morning," she said. "What can we help you find today, Miss Carter?" R.A. Carter Land Trust, I said. Parcel IDs ending in 718 and 722. Ground lease file starting 2003. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, the way clerks do when they recognize a name but won't say how. She disappeared and came back with a stack as thick as a church hymnal, slid it under the glass like a secret. Inside were documents with my initials and my signature, the capital R that curls more than the rest. My late husband, Dwayne, God rest him, came from farmers who held on to land even when it stopped making money. His grandfather bought scrubby acres nobody wanted back when they were cheap and people couldn't imagine golf courses on pasture. In 2003, after Dwayne passed, and I realized grief doesn't pay property taxes, I sat in a lawyer's office with a plant in the corner and a bowl of candy nobody ever took. We set up a land trust so developers could build without owning a single inch of soil. They pay, I maintain. Nobody knows my face unless I want them to. I turned from the counter, and there he was, Graham Connolly, 10 feet away, hands in his pockets like a man in church trying to look casual. He wasn't alone. Men like Graham are never alone. A blonde attorney hovered at his elbow, and a younger man held an iPad like a shield. "Miss Carter," Graham said softly, "we should talk." "Indeed," I said. He nodded at the folder. "We have a golf course, a clubhouse, 3 event wands, and a wedding calendar that pays 12 mortgages. If there's a renewal hiccup, then you'll restructure or reduce your footprint or hire more nurses for Meadowbrook Senior Living, the memory care wing you conveniently understaffed so you could resurface the tennis courts." His face whitened, then settled into that neutral, rich man expression that says he's got a calculator for a brain and a mirror for a heart. "That's not..." "I drive past Meadowbrook 3 times a week. I see the parking lot at 2 in the morning when one aide does the work of 3. Don't tell me how caring you are. Tell me your ratios. Tell me how many hands lift how many bodies in the hours nobody sees." He recovered quickly. "We can sit down with our teams. There's no reason to make..." "I don't need a team. I need a meeting on the record." He looked at his attorney, then back at me. "Name a time." "County Commission Chambers, public comment, Wednesday, 10 a.m. He nodded like a man swallowing a rock. We'll be there. That night, Haley called. Mom, please don't make a scene. I made a scene at the shower. I stood there and took it. We're done doing it your way. Dad says there's a misunderstanding. There is, I said. You misunderstand what respect looks like. Silence. I could hear her breathing. Then small. Are you the land trust? That's a question you should have asked from love, not from fear. And I hung up. Wednesday at the commission, you could smell old wood and coffee and the faint vanilla of paper that's been touched too many times. The room held a mix of people whose lives intersect in the corners. Elected officials in navy blazers, pastors in polo shirts, a group of teenagers in matching t-shirts for a parks fundraiser, a woman in a wheelchair with one ankle wrapped. There were TV cameras because the Connolly always draw cameras, and a row of older men who look like their golf carts have names. Graham stood first to give his update on economic development. He used phrases like innovative partnerships and win-win, and somebody behind me murmured, "That man can sell water to fish." When the chairwoman opened the floor, I walked to the mic. Rowena Ann Carter, Franklin County. You'll find me listed on your tax rolls as R.A. Carter Land Trust. I saw Graham fold, not sit, fold, like a newspaper creased across a knee. I said, my family leased land to the Connolly companies for a golf course and their venues. The renewal clause arrives in 30 days. I propose renewal with conditions. I held up 4 pages stapled tight. 1, Meadowbrook Senior Living must meet evidence-based staffing ratios within 90 days. Surprise audits, third-party monitoring, published reports. 2, the club's service worker fund, housekeepers, dishwashers, grounds crew, gets an automatic cost of living adjustment every January, audited and tied to the rate of inflation. 3, 10 Saturdays a year, the event line is free for community events, high school band fundraisers, church picnics, disability resource fairs. No markup, no invented noise complaints to push them out. 4, my daughter, Haley Connolly, will issue a public apology for her treatment of her mother at this dais. Not because I'm petty, but because accountability in private starts with accountability in public. A hum moved through the room. The chairwoman leaned forward. Ms. Carter, do you wish to submit your proposed addendum for the record? I do, I said. Cameras turned toward Haley, who sat 2 rows behind Graham. Color rose to her cheeks, then drained, then rose again. She looked small and very young all of a sudden. Her hands clenched the program until it tore. I met her eyes, not as a hammer, but as a door. I said, you can apologize today, or you can fight me for 60 days and apologize later. She walked up to the mic like a woman to a gallows. Graham put a hand out, then let it drop. Her voice shook. I shamed my mother, she said, words catching. I wanted distance from the parts of my life that felt small, and I made her small to do it. I am sorry. To her and to anyone who thinks class buys character, it doesn't. It was not eloquent, but it was true. Somewhere behind us, somebody started to clap. One pair of hands, then another, then the room. The chairwoman nodded, eyes bright like a Sunday school teacher who's seen a miracle that didn't need her to explain it. She said, "Thank you, Ms. Connolly. Mr. Connolly, you have 30 days. The calls that week were different. Not attorneys, neighbors. A physical therapist whose mother lived at Meadowbrook. A line cook who'd burned out through 3 double shifts and cried in his car where no one could see. The band director at East High, who said he'd use those free Saturdays to raise money for new clarinets. People handed me stories like folded notes, and I wrote every name in my spiral notebook with the care I used to cut quilt squares. The Connollys brought their teams to negotiations. I brought a yellow legal pad and a thermos of coffee. They tried to drown me in consultants. I came with numbers and names. They tried to charm me with lunch. I brought pay stubs from men who blow leaves in November and salt walks in February for $12 an hour. We sat across a long table where people usually find ways to say no without saying it. I said, "Let's skip the dance. You're rich because you're good at protecting the rich. I'm comfortable because I learned how to protect boundaries. The renewal is yours to lose." Graham steepled his fingers, that thinking pose men in magazines adopt. "Why stay hidden all these years, Miss Carter? You could have lived like this a long time ago." I said, "Because quiet is safe, and because people show you who they are when they think you're nobody." A twitch of a smile touched his face. "And what did I show you?" I said, "That you know when to listen. Use it." We signed the addendum 2 days before the deadline. News crews filmed a ribbon cutting in the Meadowbrook lobby for a new transparent staffing dashboard mounted where everyone could see day-by-day ratios. Families cried and clapped. Aides and scrub tops took photos with weary relief. The club announced raises for housekeepers and dishwashers, backed by that COLA clause. And a groundsman looked at his hands like they finally belonged to him. On the first of the 10 free Saturdays, teenagers in East High t-shirts played pep band under cheap string lights, while church ladies sold sheep cake from Kroger, and a boy with braces handed out raffle tickets like a magician with a trick he knew would work. At home, the quiet returned. You don't realize how loud negotiations are until the phone stops ringing. I hemmed a robe for the alto section, drank coffee from a chipped mug, and watered the plant my neighbor swears is artificial but somehow keeps growing. The doorbell rang on a Wednesday at dusk. Haley stood there, hair in a deflated ponytail, makeup smudged by either rain or crying. She held a plastic deli tote. "I brought muffins. From that diner of Parsons you like. I also brought this." She lifted a crisp white envelope. Inside was the power of attorney form, ripped in half. "I was wrong," she said, voice raw, "about everything. I wanted control because I felt out of control. I wanted your life to be neat so mine would photograph well. I forgot who packed extra Kleenex in my backpack for field trips and who baked casseroles for Mrs. Dugan when Mr. Dugan died. I forgot," here she laughed, a broken little sound, "that the quilt I mocked kept Ethan's grandma warm through her last winter." I nodded at the table. We ate warm blueberry muffins from a styrofoam clamshell, butter melting into paper. The sound of the 10 bus drifted in, steady as a heartbeat. Nobody spoke until the quiet felt like a blanket instead of a wall. "I don't need your money," she said finally. "Dad says you could have wiped our mortgages off the map. I don't want that. I want to learn how you built a life that didn't crumble when people laughed. You start with boring habits. You make the call you don't want to make. You keep the promises you make to your future self. You pay attention to envelopes and clauses, and you apologize fast when you're wrong." She wiped her nose with the back of her sleeve like she was 12 again. "Can you teach me?" "I can, but I can't teach you while you're still trying to manage me." She flinched, then exhaled. "Fair." We met for lunch on Fridays after that at a diner where the waitress calls everyone honey and remembers who drinks decaf. We didn't talk about money at first. We talked about cravings and swollen ankles and people's weird opinions about strollers. About the way her old friends had quietly vanished when she stopped throwing perfect dinners and started wearing the same leggings 3 days in a row. I asked about Ethan. She asked about my bus routes and whether I missed the good kids. I told her there were no good kids and no bad ones, only kids who needed to be seen before the seatbelt snapped. Then we started to talk about money. I showed her a spiral-bound ledger I kept for years, pencil columns with neat sums, envelopes labeled with months and fence repair, property taxes calculated with the kind of respect you give a storm. I told her about Dwayne's grandfather, who brought scrubland for pennies because his neighbors thought rocks meant poverty. I told her how grief and property taxes make a bitter stew, and how a kind lawyer with a plant and a candy bowl set up a trust that let me keep what we had without inviting strangers to pick through it. Haley listened with her head tipped like the words were water, and she was trying to find the deepest stream. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked one afternoon, a fork stuck in a slice of pie too sweet even for the diner. "Because when people see money, they stop seeing you," I said. "Because quiet habits are easier to keep when nobody's holding a mirror up and telling you you're a saint. Because if I told you when you were 15 and wanted Uggs, you'd have learned the wrong lesson. And because I didn't trust myself to raise a child who valued respect over status if I kept a spotlight on the numbers and not the people that money touches." She looked at her hands. "You didn't trust me, or you didn't trust you?" "Both," I said. "Honesty's cheaper than a lawyer." Meadowbrook changed. Not in a movie montage, but in the stubborn, ordinary ways that matter. Staffing ratios meant Miss Jackson got 2 hands to help her stand, not 1. Aid schedules meant Mr. Patel's father got turned every 2 hours so his skin stayed healthy, and his dignity did too. The transparent dashboard meant families stopped feeling like they were making a fuss when they pushed a call light, because now a number backed up their fear. The club changed around the edges too. When you raise wages, a dishwasher who used to call off because he couldn't afford a bus pass made his shift on time. A groundskeeper bought his daughter a winter coat new, not from a rack someone else rifled first. I won't pretend the Connollys became saints, but respect is a habit like any other. It sticks if you practice it enough. One night in August, the storm nobody had predicted hovered over Columbus like a bowl turned upside down. The sky went green-black, the kind of color that makes you check the closet for a flashlight. The wind had the low moan of a church organ searching for the right key, and people on my street stood in their doorways like wary cats. Meadowbrook's power flickered, then went out. 6 months ago, that would have been a nightmare. With new staffing and a generator install the board hated but signed because I made it a condition, the aides moved like practiced dancers. They gathered the residents into the hallways, turned flashlights into fireflies, and sang, "You are my sunshine," while one of the nurses checked oxygen tanks. Graham showed up in jeans and a ball cap with a stack of pizzas he'd bought with his own money, because sometimes penance looks like grease stains on a nice shirt. Families arrived with portable fans and phone chargers, and someone propped open the door so the breeze moved. Nobody died. I can't give you a better metric than that. A week later at the club, a board member cornered me near the patio heaters. He had the kind of smile that doesn't move your cheeks, only your teeth. He said, "Be honest, Miss Carter. All this charity work, doesn't it make you feel good to play hero?" I took a sip of lukewarm coffee and looked at the lawn where teenagers were dragging folding tables into place for the next community Saturday. I said, "Heroes are for movies. I like receipts." He laughed like I'd made a joke. It wasn't a joke. In September, we held community night on the event lawn. The band boosters grilled hot dogs, and someone's auntie brought a crock pot of chili that made your eyes water in the best way. Moms in practical shoes handed out bingo cards to a table of veterans in ball caps. The Meadowbrook staff set up a booth with pamphlets about fall prevention and a sign-up sheet for a caregiver support group. Toddler feet beat the grass, sticky with cake and joy. Nobody asked to see a membership card. Graham stood near the gate, talking to a nursing assistant about tuition reimbursement, his face serious in a way I hadn't seen back when his days were a blur of deals and golf. He looked like a man who'd been told the names of the people who hold up his life and finally believed them. People can change, not because you wish it so, but because consequences draft a new script. Haley waddled up in a dress with tiny lemon prints, one hand on the small of her back. "Your granddaughter," she announced, "has decided ribs are overrated. Could we please go get chili from the church booth?" Atta girl. And we inched our way through the folding chairs and lawn blankets and people who offered to hold Haley's plate while she sat. After we ate, the band director handed Haley the mic. She held it like something dangerous she wanted to do right. "I said something ugly once. I learned 2 things the hard way. 1, money can buy flowers and chairs and fountains, but not character. 2, if you want your daughter to grow up strong, you apologize to your mother where you broke her, in public." She handed the mic back. The crowd hummed that warm Midwestern approval that isn't loud but lands like a coat over your shoulders. "Mom," she asked later, when the paper plates were stacked and someone's toddler had fallen asleep belly down on a picnic blanket, "can I ask you something selfish?" "You can ask," I said. "When you said yes or no to the renewal, what was your line? What would have made you walk?" I looked around at the kids packing up their horns, the housekeepers in club polos dancing with their toddlers, the Meadowbrook aides in scrub tops checking on an elderly gentleman in a lawn chair to make sure he wasn't getting chilled. My line was dignity, I said. If the deal made the people who do the hardest work stand smaller, it was a no. If it made them stand taller, it was a yes. She put her head on my shoulder, the way she did when I used to braid her hair before a school picture. "Then I'm glad you drew it." The baby came on a cold Tuesday in November, when the first week snow tried to pretend it could stick. We waited in a quiet corner of the hospital, me with coffee in a paper cup, Ethan with a worry he tried to hide, and Haley with her hands gripping the rails and the kind of courage you don't know you have until you have to use it. Babies have a way of reminding you how small you are and how big your love can be at the same time. When they placed that child in my arms, I felt a line run through me like a seam, grandmother to mother to daughter, and back again. "What will you call her?" I asked. "Ada," she said, "for your mother, and because it sounds strong." "Strong is a habit," I said. "We'll teach her." We kept teaching. We taught with receipts and casseroles and phone calls returned. We taught with apologies that didn't come wrapped in excuses. I watched Haley learn to say, "I was wrong," without a but. I watched Ethan change diapers with the concentration of a surgeon. I watched Graham sit in a Meadowbrook lounge on a quiet Sunday afternoon and let a man with Alzheimer's tell him the same story 3 times. And I watched Ada discover that ceiling fans are miracles. Not everyone liked the changes. There were men who grumbled that the community Saturdays made the club feel like a county fair. There were women who rolled their eyes when servers got raises and added service charges cut into their tipping habits. There was a board member who tried to sneak in language to end the free event clause, and who found himself on the wrong end of a camera when a soccer team with 50 moms called him out on the nightly news. Consequences teach too. In January,
the chairwoman asked me to join a small advisory circle for the county's elder care oversight. She said, "We need a voice who understands contracts and casseroles. You speak both." I agreed with a condition of my own, that we create a fund, tiny at first, to help family caregivers pay for respite care so they could take a nap or a shower or sit in their car and cry if they needed to. It is easy to speak about policy from a dais. It is harder to notice the woman nodding off in a waiting room while her husband stares at a TV with the sound on mute. I visited Meadowbrook on a Tuesday in February when the halls smelled like lemon cleaner and faintly like pancakes from a special breakfast cart. Mrs. Jackson, who had once taught me the multiplication tables in second grade, pulled me down by the sleeve. She said, "You're the quiet one." I said, "I try." She said, "Don't stop. The loud ones make speeches. The quiet ones keep the lights on." I thought about lights, the kind that go out in a storm and the kind that flicker behind eyes when someone remembers their daddy's laugh. I thought about my husband's hand on the back of my neck when I cried into our pillow after he died, and how hands can be both weight and hold. I thought about the young woman at the club who used to smirk and now looked me in the eye like I had a name and not just a role. On Ada's first birthday, we threw a party at my condo because there is not a cake on earth that needs a ballroom. Balloons tied to chair backs, paper hats that fell off after 5 minutes, a sheet cake with pink frosting from Kroger, and a corner piece for the birthday girl, because laws are laws. Ada smeared icing into her hair with the joy of a woman who has not yet learned shame. Haley laughed until she cried. Ethan took 100 photos, half of them blurry. Graham carried out the trash without being asked and wiped the counter like a man who'd finally learned where things live. After everyone left and the place looked like confetti had exploded, Haley stayed to help me wash dishes in the sink, because I refuse to pretend we are too good for a sink when the dishwasher is full. She dried a plate and set it on the rack with exaggerated care. She keeps thinking about something you said, about people showing you who they are when they think you're nobody. I said. She said nobody, I thought, was the worst thing to be. Now I think being nobody to the wrong people might be the safest way to find the right ones.
"That'll preach," I said, and she laughed. She looked around my little kitchen at the mismatched mugs and the potted plant that still lived no matter how many times my neighbor declared it fake. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "staying quiet that long?" "Regret is a luxury," I said. "I have questions, I have grief, I have gratitude. Quiet was a tool I had. Now I have different tools." "What tools?" She was smiling, but her eyes were serious. "Boundaries," I said, "receipts, and making sure the loudest voice in the room isn't the only one with a mic." We put the last plate away. The apartment went still, the way a room does when it's been full and is ready to exhale. I sat and took out my spiral notebook and wrote down what I always write when life shifts: the date, a one-line truth I want to remember, and a list of names I don't want to forget. The truth that day: love without respect is not love. Control is not care. And the land under your feet matters less than how you stand on it. Months later, when the peonies on other people's cakes bloomed again, community night returned with a vengeance. The bamboosters ran out of hot dolls before 8, the bingo caller lost her voice, and the Meadowbrook aides danced to a song that would have made my mother blush. I stood near the edge of the lawn and watched it all, a little embarrassed by how my cheeks hurt from smiling. For the first time in a long time, my life fit in my hands. A woman I didn't recognize walked over. She was 50, maybe 60, with a cardigan tied around her waist and a tiredness the foundation shade couldn't fully erase. "Are you Miss Carter?" she asked. "I am." I wanted to say, "My husband is at Meadowbrook. The night the power went out, I couldn't get there because our street flooded. A nurse named Tegan sat with him and held the phone to his ear so he could hear me say goodnight. She said they had enough people on hand because of some rule change. I don't know how these things work. I just know he wasn't alone. I felt my throat tighten the way it does when feelings don't ask permission. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She nodded once, then twice, and walked back into the crowd. I stood with my hands on my hips and looked up at the string lights and let myself imagine for 1 minute that quiet can carry as far as shouting if it's aimed true. Later that evening, Haley found me under the oak tree. "Mom," she said, "you know how we talked about teaching Ada that strength is a habit?" "Yes." "Can we teach me again?" Her laugh was small. "I forget when people clap." "We can teach each other," I said. "It's cheaper than a seminar." She put her arm through mine. Ada slept in the stroller like a princess who had found the one place in the kingdom where people didn't need to whisper. The music floated over us, along with voices and the crackle of a grill that still had one last batch to get through. A breeze lifted the corners of the banner that read "Community Night, Free," and flapped it like a promise. If you've ever wondered whether any of it matters, papers and meetings and clauses and making men who have people for things do things themselves for once, let me tell you this. I have stood on ground that looks fancy while people who do the hardest work are invisible. And I have stood on ground that looks ordinary while the invisible get named and paid. The grass is grass both places. What changes is who gets to stand tall. On nights when the quiet feels thick and the old ache of being looked down on tries to take up a chair at my table, I remind myself of a handful of scenes. A nurse holding a phone to a man's ear in the dark, a dishwasher buying his kid a new coat, my daughter ripping a piece of paper in half and asking how to be better, a girl named Ada smearing frosting into her hair because joy doesn't ask permission. I write those scenes down in my spiral notebook in pencil so the paper feels the weight of the stroke. The week Ada turned 2, she pointed at the cross stitch on my wall and asked, "What's that, Nana?" I said, "Words to live by. Do small things with great love." She nodded like I told her something obvious and returned to crumbling crackers into her doll's teacup because practice makes permanent. I watched her and thought, this is what legacy looks like. Not a plaque, not a ballroom, a habit you put in the hands of someone who will use it when you're gone. I don't know how long my quiet will carry. I don't know which decisions will outlast me and which will be undone by someone with a pen and no conscience. But I know this. If you draw your line at dignity and you keep your receipts, if you apologize where you broke and you act where you speak, if you remember that control is not care and love without respect is just performance, then the land under your feet will feel stable, whether it belongs to you or not. I am Rowena Ann Carter. My friends call me Nora. I like peanut butter crackers and quilts and numbers that add up. I believe in county chambers and casseroles. If you think I'm nobody, that's fine. I've learned what to do with that. And if you're the kind of somebody who likes to laugh when you think no one important is watching, I suggest you look down before you step. Sometimes the ground has a name. Sometimes the ground has a voice. And sometimes, if you've been standing on people for too long, the ground looks up and asks you to sit, please, and listen.